Welcome for those of you that are joining us for our webinar and our meeting this morning on Unlocking More Talent. We're so glad that you are with us. We're doing this in a rather untraditional meeting format so we can have a lot of interaction and good exchange with questions as we go through our topic today. So if you can do me a favor, it would be terrific if you can make sure you're muted. And then we are recording this too. We had a lot of people who just had conflicts, so they asked for a recording. So we are recording the meeting so we can share it with them later. But we are so thrilled that you are here. I think most everybody on the call I have met or been acquainted with before, but Sheri Welsh, Welsh and Associates. And again, glad to have you here to talk about this really important topic for getting access to more talent. So without further ado, let's get started. I am going to share my screen with you. There we go. And we have a great program in store for you today. I want to start by telling you a little bit more about our presenters and who is with us today. So we have Dr. Steve Butt with us. Steve is the Dean of Western's College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. We have Dr. Paulo Zagalo-Melo. He is the Associate Provost for WMU's Institute for Global Education. And also with us is Lee Ryder. She is the Senior Director of International Student and Scholar Services at Western. So to all of you, thank you and welcome. Glad you can share information on this really important topic. So let's talk about first why we are here, okay? And I got to get my slideshow to advance. Bear with me. So the war from talent is far from over. And that's something that I think you need to understand. This is an acute conversation that we continue to have on a regular basis because talent is our business and we talk about it all the time. Dr. Butt and I have known each other for a number of years and happened to run into each other again in December and started the conversation once again about talent. Both of us having quite a bit of heartburn, right, about the wonderful talent that's available to us through Western Michigan University, and particularly in his College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And sometimes the inability to adequately connect people together through Western students, right, companies and prospective hires, graduates, candidates. So we talked about, in particular, really great talent in the international student population there at Western. Students that are coming from other countries, pursuing a master's degree, advanced degrees in a STEM field, with a very strong desire to work in the United States, and for many of them to stay in the United States long term. But the inability for them to adequately be connected to opportunities and jobs in here in the United States, and in particular in Kalamazoo, right? So what I recognize after being in the business for over 25 years is that there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about this opportunity and how to make it happen. And that might be a barrier, particularly for a lot of companies in our region to really understand, and smaller companies too, especially, to really understand how to make this happen. So this is how this whole webinar and this whole idea, this pilot program that we're launching was born, to give you a little bit of background. Because Steve and I put our heads together and said, there's got to be a better way to do this. We recognize that we need to do a huge shift, though, if we're going to do things different. So let's talk a little bit about the war for talent and how we know that it's far from over, right? For the next 20 years, finding great talent in your companies is going to be an issue, particularly in the STEM fields. And here's what we know. Some of the challenges have to do with just what we're facing in the state of Michigan, okay? You may know that Michigan's population is declining. The governor announced a population council that just produced a lot of research. It's a big, thick white paper, and you can read through it, but I'm glad to highlight some things for you. One is that we have really high levels of outward migration in the state of Michigan, and We have declining birth rates going back to the 1970s. So that has contributed long-term to our slow growth in population in Michigan. From 2010 to 2020, Michigan had the 46th slowest population growth rate among the 47 states that saw an increase during that time. And Michigan was one of 19 states that experienced a decline in population from 2020 to 2022. So this is documented, it's serious. You know, we did see a little bit of growth in population, but in some very concentrated areas being Southeast Michigan, Grand Rapids, and Traverse City. But overall, the state lost numbers, okay? We've also seen demographic changes, and many of you are acutely aware of this. Michigan's population, however, is aging faster than the national average. We are the 14th oldest state in the nation. It's projected that our population of prime working age adults, and that's 25 to 54, will remain flat through 2050 if we don't do anything, okay? Now, there's going to be some significant shifts in the age distribution, right? Where the younger population is going to decrease 5%, but the older population, 55 and above, is going to increase 14%. So our workforce is graying rapidly, and with a decrease in the younger ages, you can see there's just not enough workers coming up to fill those roles. Historically, in Michigan, we have had a net population loss among prime working age talent for years. Okay, another concern in the state of Michigan is our education system, right? K-12, we are 39th in fourth grade reading in the US. We rank 33rd nationally in eighth grade math, and we rank 41st in high school graduation rates. So the students that we're graduating in the state of Michigan aren't stacking up competitively. So what can we say? We're missing warm bodies to work in jobs. We just don't have the population. Educationally, we may be falling a little bit behind with what we're producing. Why don't we just relocate? And that seems like a great option, but for those of you who have worked with relocating folks from around the country, you know, that's not always easy. And it's for a lot of factors, but I can tell you this. There is a global outplacement firm by the name of Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, and they are involved in an annual survey that they do looking at relocation trends, and they've done these trends for well over 20 years, right? They've monitored them. When they released their results last May, their new results are soon to come out. This is what they found. Job seekers relocating for new jobs fell to the lowest level on record since they had been recording it. In Q1 of 2023, only 1.6% of job seekers relocated for new positions. That was down from 4.6 in Q1 of 2022, which 4.6 isn't a lot either. And to put that in perspective, Challenger, Gray, and Christmas has been doing this reporting for a long time, right? They've been monitoring this data for a long time. In the 80s and 90s, do you know that 30% of job seekers would relocate for positions? So when we talk about relocation being harder than ever, it really, truly is. That's a game changer. It's not just as easy as bringing people in from other areas. So what does this mean? That means we need to do some things different. The current state of recruiting is this. Recent SHRM survey, if any of you are SHRM members, that came out in January of 2024, showed that 77% of HR professionals right now are experiencing recruiting difficulty over the past 12 months. That is significant. Another thing to note is that Michigan has the highest employment level of industrial engineers and manufacturing engineers of any state in the country. So friends, if we can't find engineers in Michigan right now, given the fact that there are more of them here than any other state in the country, how do we combat this challenge? Well, we do it by doing something different, right? We need a paradigm shift, a serious paradigm shift. So you may have heard this in your organization. Well, we would like to hire someone who will stay with us for the long term. Like, we're not interested in somebody who just wants to be here for 2 to 4 years, 5 years, and then move on. That's just not enough time for us. We need someone who wants to stick around longer. Here's the truth. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average tenure for an employee age 25 to 34 is 2.8 years. That's across all industries, all disciplines, 2.8 years. So that prime pool of candidates that you want to hire in your organization, right in that age range where they have just the right experience to be really successful, but aren't really priced out of the multitude of jobs that you need to fill, the likelihood is they're only going to stick around 2 to 8 years, right? The other thing is this. The Work Institute in 2023 released data that showed that 38% of employees quit within the first year. Companies are not doing a great job at retaining them. People change their minds and move on. So this all goes to show that it's really a misnomer that we're able to hire somebody and expect to keep them for much longer than 3 years, right? So we need a paradigm shift in the way we approach what can really be successful in our organizations. We also recognize that many CEOs, top leadership, hiring managers, some of you, and even in human resources, may believe that sponsoring an international employee is a time-consuming and expensive process, right? But it's not. It really is not. And that's what Lee and Paulo are going to help you understand today. So if we're going to win the war for talent, we really need more tools in our toolkit. And we think we have a really great tool to introduce you to today that can be a difference maker if you can change your mindset and look at your approach a little bit differently. This program will not solve every talent issue that you have, but it may help you get a couple positions filled in the STEM fields that could make a huge difference in your organization. So if I told you that you could gain access to a STEM talent pool in Kalamazoo with no recruiting fees, they would be pre-screened for fit and are highly likely to stay on the job for a minimum of 3 years, I guess the question is, why wouldn't you consider that option, right? On Monday, April 8th, we held an event at the College of Engineering. Dr. Butt helped put this in place. The invitation was extended to all international master's degree students at Western who were interested in doing work in the United States, right? They would have interest in entering into the STEM OPT program. This is what the room looked like, and this was the interaction. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing, Welsh and Associates is doing in the program, and how the university has helped supporting the program as well. But when we tell you we've got students ready to go, we've got students ready to go. We're not kidding. So right now, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Butt and have him talk a little bit about what is STEM OPT exactly? What does that mean? Steve, can you jump on and share a little more?
I sure can. Thank you, Sheri. And just before I get started with that, just a couple quick things. This is not the only path that the engineering campus is looking at, but this is probably the fastest one to get you some folks very quickly. We are still looking at dual enrollment for high schools. We're working with community colleges. We're upskilling your current workforce. And we're also now offering certificate programs to actually bring older populations back into the workforce. So other things are going on too. But what we're talking about here are our international students, in particular are those that are holding an F1 visa, and they're eligible to actually work through something called practical training. And there's two ways that this could happen. One is while they're taking their degree, and that's called CPT, so curricular practical training. And the other is once they finish their degree and they're working in the area their degree was actually set up for, they can work afterwards too. And that's what we're really looking at here. But even if they're working during their education, you can think about that as most of these, as Sheri mentioned, are master's level students. So they've already got a degree in engineering, and many of them have worked for 1, 2, 10 years before they're getting here. So they've got a lot of and a wealth of experience as well. So as long as these students are working in jobs related to your companies in the areas of their discipline, most of these students can actually work right away. And as you'll hear from the folks from the international office here in a few minutes, they're going to tell you how easy that could actually be. And so I'm going to be on the call here later as well for any questions, but it's really the fact of being able to offer positions in these areas which actually match our disciplines.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. And now, to get a little more insight as to how this works exactly, Paulo, can you share with us a little bit about how it works? And I see we got a typo on the slide. My apologies for that. We missed
First,
out.
thank you, Sheri. So we have in the US a long-standing history and tradition, of course, of seeking global talent. That's part of what this country is, in fact. Because we understand that competitiveness, high performance and high levels of competitiveness have to be built upon a global understanding of talent. And higher education has played that role or an important role in bringing global talent to the US. And particularly Michigan. Michigan has always ranked in the top 10 states for most international students in the United States. And within Michigan, Western Michigan University is typically in the top 3 in terms of either total international enrollment or percentage of international enrollment in the total enrollment. We are well above the national average. National average for the percentage of international enrollment in the total enrollment is about 5.5%. We have been consistently at 10% at Western Michigan University. So this search for global talent not only brings competitiveness in terms of, I'd say, the hard skills, but also it also helps complementing another negative trend we have in the US that also affects and impacts our competitiveness, and that is the learning a second or acquisition of a second language. We are at the lowest in US history and this is for self-identified language proficiency. We're at the lowest in the history of the US for percentage of people who speak a second language or a language other than English. So bringing talent from other countries with other languages also helps companies becoming more proficient in terms of actual intercultural language communication for their own business and for other goals. Lastly, I'd like to also mention that typically international students at the graduate level, they're known as high performance students. Generally speaking, they're high performance students. And this has an actual explanation why international students consistently perform so well at the graduate level. And that is because unlike the US higher education system, most countries in the world they don't have general education. So when you go to college for your undergraduate degree, you already choose the topic you want to study. So if you're going to study biology, you're going to have 3 or 4 years depending on the length of the undergraduate degree, of all biology courses. And if you're studying, mechanical engineering, it's going to be 4 years of mechanical engineering, mechanical engineering courses. So it's very, very focused on the actual major topic. And there's nothing that goes beyond in the curriculum that goes beyond that topic. And so in terms of preparation, what happens is that when international students from those educational systems come here, they've had more years of academic training in that particular area that they're now doing their masters in. And that is the actual explanation for the consistent higher performance of international students, often compared to US students. That's a technical explanation. It's the difference between higher education systems. So having said this, at Western Michigan, we really have a tradition of global education. I typically say that Western has global education or global and international in its DNA, in its institutional DNA. And we also have very diverse international enrollment. We usually have more than 90 countries represented at our university. So we have a long tradition and also deep experience of dealing with career potential for the international students who come here. And obviously CPT and OPT are things that my office works extensively with. And to go into the details of how easy it is to, I guess, deconstruct the myth that it's so difficult to, when anything that involves immigration, to hire an international student or an international employee is so difficult, so time consuming, so bureaucratic, and so expensive. To break down the myth, I have here Lee Ryder. As Sheri mentioned, Lee Ryder is our Senior Director for International Student Scholar Services. And Lee also has few people from her team here. So I'd like them to ask Lee to step in at this point and help us really understand that this OPT and CPT are very easy pathways for employers to acquire global talent in a quick, easy way, and also a great opportunity for the students taking on these OPT and CPT tracks. So Lee, would you like to?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And
So-
usually when you see the legal side of things, you think, oh, here comes the most bureaucratic part of, but it's really for the employer part, for the employer perspective, OPT is really, I think, a great opportunity. Go ahead, Lee, sorry.
Thank you. So OPT, what is this benefit and how can employers make use of this? In a nutshell, OPT provides 12 months of practical training. So it's basically a work permit. Students can work for you as prospective employers. And then if they are in a certain STEM field, then they can get an additional 24 months of employment working for employers, provided that employer is in a program known as E-Verify. E-Verify is simply the I-9 work verification process. It's a program that's offered by Homeland Security. Basically, it's a software program to process the I-9 electronically. There's no extra charge for it. It's a free voluntary program. So as long as employers sign up for the free voluntary E-Verify program and they're interested in hiring our STEM students, they can actually employ students on what's known as OPT and then STEM OPT. So 12 months of the first OPT benefit with another 2-year extension, that's a total of 3 years of employment just on OPT alone. There's also additional possibilities down the road known as H-1B and permanent residency sponsorship. I'm also an immigration attorney, so sometimes I'm working with students as they go through the longer pathways. But basically, employers sometimes like to know, well, what are the requirements for me? What's the burden for me or the cost? And let me tell you this, for OPT, there is no cost for the employer. It's actually the student's application. The student applies for OPT, and so the student pays their own fee. So when a student applies for OPT, their fee is for an online application, $470 for the first 12 months of their permit. And then if they're applying for the extension to continue with their employer as a STEM OPT student, they refile again for their extension, and that's only costing them another $470. That then covers them for that entire 3 years of work authorization. In addition to this, sometimes employers are interested in our WMU students before they graduate. And there's also other forms of practical training that allow our students to work in internships related to their field. They do need to be registered in an academic credit or something that it's required for their degree program. And then under that program, known as CPT, Curricular Practical Training, we're able to authorize our students to work for employers in related internships. And this is also at no cost to the employer. And it's actually no additional cost to the student either, so long as they're enrolled in coursework and paying their tuition for that. So these are a couple of great programs that are available to employers, and we stand ready to help match you with our students for these. Sometimes employers also ask, well, is there any other obligation for me if I take on an OPT student? And under the program, there is a form once the students are on the STEM extension part of their program that employers are asked to fill out, but it really is not burdensome. It's known as an employer training plan. It does have some attestations to it, but basically, what is it requiring the employer to attest to? Basically, that you're going to offer the student related training, that you're going to supervise and train them in this function, and basically just treat them commensurate as you would a U.S. worker in terms of the employment terms. In the event that a student were to be terminated or leave the job, on the training plan, it has the school contact, and you would just need to notify the school within 5 days of that happening. Also, it has provisions that they don't want you to, they don't allow you to like terminate a U.S. worker and replace them with an international worker. So they just want you to make sure that you're treating them commensurate as you would a U.S. worker in terms of duties and pay and like positions. So that's basically the OPT in a nutshell, and we will have time at the end for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lee. Well, Brent Butler, I'm going to pick on you for a second. I know you're there. If you can unmute. Brent is somebody I've worked with for years and years. And as he and I chatted about this webinar and what we were going to talk about, he said, Sheri, we're already doing this. We've already hired students through OPT, and it's been great. So I asked him if he would just share briefly a little bit about his experience there at WKW. Brent, can you share with the group?
Sure, absolutely. So like you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we've been having trouble finding engineers. We've been partnering with Western for several years on undergrad students, some of which were international and some were not. Recently, we hired an individual who we brought in through the CPT program, and now on OPT, while we try to sponsor for the H-1B program. But he's finished up his master's program, a great asset. He's education really puts him up with some of our more senior engineers based on the level of contribution he's already made. We also just hired 2 other master's students through the CPT program to bring on as interns, and we have a 3rd one joining us shortly. So we found the program to be very easy to use. As mentioned, you know, the application process is mostly on the students. They're very well educated on the process. They bring all that information to us, so it makes it very easy for us to follow and bring them on. And so far, excellent benefit from bringing on the students. Their energy and experience has been awesome, and we're just pleased to have them. So I highly recommend it, and then again, it is very easy to use.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Brent. I think it's always helpful to hear from someone who's done this, been there, done that, and had a great experience. And so hopefully that will encourage you to consider it and try it. So here's what we've kind of put together in this pilot program. As Steve said, there's you can get access to OPT students, and you get access to Western students through a number of different methods and ways. But we put together a little pilot program that we want to streamline this, particularly for our clients. Why? Because we care about your success. You don't come to us for entry-level students. We know that. We provide you talent at the higher levels of experience. However, we know that entry-level folks are really important to you. They're important to the success of your organization, and your success is important to us as well. So here's why we're doing this and what we're going to do. So like you saw pictures from the April 8th meeting, we are holding information meetings with students, right, to explain this program and what's available to them if they work with us in this program, right? Those students that come to the informational meeting, they're given some information on resume writing. They're given some information on interviewing help and culture fit, and allowed to ask all kinds of questions about what it's like to work for companies in Kalamazoo. We ask them to apply to be in the program, to work further with us. And when they do that, our staff at Welsh & Associates does an initial screening with all of the candidates. So we're able to provide a recap of the skills, interests, and long-term career objectives of any of the students that step up and put their hand up and say, I'd like to be a part of this. So if you are familiar with our screening process, you know what that looks like, and you know how that feels. From that, we now have a great pool of already vetted, already screened students ready to share with you, okay? Which we are willing to do and share with you at no cost, right? We're just doing this as a service to try to make some great connections to help the university, help the students, and to also help you. So you can tell us what you need. We'll get as many qualified students in your hands as we have access to. And then you interview the students yourself with your team, right? You select and decide who you want to hire. And then you work with Paulo and Lee's team to complete that hiring process through the university and fill out the necessary paperwork. It's just that simple. So the extra pieces that we're adding in for you are bringing you a group of students that are actively and interested in and wanting to be involved, right? Care deeply about being hired, want to be hired in this region, potentially want to stay in this region, and many of them for the long term. So there's no cost here either. So what are the obstacles? Like what do we have to get through to make this successful for all of us, for the university, for the students, for you as the employer, and for the long-term success of your organization? Okay, so one of the obstacles is really shifting paradigms of our leadership, right? So if you have folks on your team that really don't understand this, the cost, that there is none, the ease, it's very simple. The whole idea of needing to hire only for long-term, right? 3 years is long-term. We just learned that today. Maybe our data that we shared with you will help to shift some paradigms in the minds of leadership to be open to considering this program, this opportunity, as a way to bring new talent in, right? Some of you may be in a position where you say, well, you know, we really don't need entry level of engineers very often, or we don't have a need right now. So another thing to consider is maybe deconstructing and reconstructing job descriptions in some of your STEM fields and STEM departments. So think of it this way. Perhaps there is a specific role or two that can be designated as ideal and perfectly appropriate for this program, right? Maybe you look at the whole department and you peel off a set of responsibilities that gets morphed now into a role like this. And you use that role to fill constantly with STEM OPT students, right? Master's level, international, degreed engineers. A lot of these engineers will want to stay long-term. I will tell you anecdotally from the experience I had in the room on April 8th with talking with many of the engineers and potential engineers, they want to stay in the US long-term. You may say, but there's a risk, Sheri, because at 3 years, they may want to go back to their home country, and fair enough. I would just make the argument and suggestion to you that if that is the case, they will tell you before they hit the 3-year mark. And guess what? You'll be able to find another one coming right behind them, because the university is moving through more and more students every year who are anxious to be hired in the job openings that you have, okay? So what are some of the added benefits, right, that you get from participating in something like this? Well, I mean, first of all, it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time. Anecdotally, I talked with one of our clients as we were preparing this program, and they shared that when they put a posting out for an entry-level position, they can receive upwards of 80 applications or more for that entry-level role. Many of the applicants are international students coming from all across the country. And quite frankly, they're not interested in hiring international students from across the country, only from our region, right? Because of the idea that they might want, they're here and they might want to stay here. But to have to weed through all 80 applications to figure out which ones have ties here and which ones do not is a real burden. This will cut that down for you. There are missed opportunities also with a question that we put on many of our applications when we ask people to apply online for our jobs. Many of you may recognize that you have a question on your application which says, do you require sponsorship for this job? And that is often a showstopper from the perspective of the international student. Let's stand in their shoes for a minute. They have told us when they come to that box, they have to check, in order to be honest, they have to check, yes, they do require sponsorship because they require CPT or OPT, right, to take on that job. They do not require H-1B, right? But if that box being checked offers no further room for explanation that their sponsorship is really CPT or OPT, you may believe they require expensive, time-consuming H-1B sponsorship and check them off the list and move on, right? But yet they realize if they do not check that box saying that they do not require sponsorship, and you speak to them and find out that they do need CPT or OPT, you may suggest that they're not being truthful on their application and remove them for that very reason. So I guess what I'm suggesting is there may be a need to relook at the way we ask that question on applications and open it up for a little bit more explanation so you don't miss opportunities. But through this program, you miss zero because we already know exactly what they need. The other thing that I think is really important is sometimes you run into salary expectations with entry level and master's degree students, right? That are well beyond what you can pay. So we're in a position to have that conversation. Salary expectations will have been discussed, and applicants will be happy to accept the range for your job when you look at them. There won't be any surprises at the end, which we all know is never very fun. And then the other thing to remember is that long-term sponsorship really has good return on investment, right? I mean, if you want to retain an individual after that, having them with you for maybe 3 years and move on to H-1B sponsorship, you are now investing in a loyal employee who's been with you 3 years with a known skill set and a great work ethic. It's a really good calculated risk to bring them on through an H-1B sponsorship, much more so than if you're just hiring someone who applied to your website. So those are some of the benefits that we see from this program. Now the question is, how do we get started, right? How do we do this? Really, the best way to do this is to just let me know, look at, we're in. We want to work through this program. We've got a couple ideas. We will get you into it and get the ball rolling. We'd like to start the program with only about 10 companies, so we can work out any potential kinks. If there's some things we haven't thought through, we want to fix it and get it right before we expand it larger than this. But if you want to be in it, I want to hear from you. Let me know in an email, phone call, whatever it is today, and we can get you rolling. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and invite questions for any of us.
Sheri, while our participants are thinking of their questions, I have a quick comment I'd like to make. So as you mentioned, and very well, that you can screen and can collect the offers, and then when there are offers, send the potential OPT to our office. We also have students who apply for OPT before they actually have a job offer, in which case we're doing the reverse. We can do the reverse. We can let Sheri know, and she'll let you all know of this group of potential students who can potentially be hired already having OPT. So that's also another option. And another thing that hiring international students brings to your organizations is that expands your global network. They are from a country where probably you still don't have many connections, or you have connections and you're adding more connections. And so even while student or what this is your employee, you can actually have them to help you establish yourselves in the markets of the countries where they're coming from. So that's also another dimension that I think is often seen as kind of or overlooked, but I think it's an important one. And of course, the incentive for retention from the student's perspective is very, very high compared to a US employee. There's really data on this that shows that the retention is much higher because the incentive for the student is very high too. And many of them, their first US hometown was Kalamazoo, or their first their hometown is West Michigan. So they develop, by the time they get to OPT, by the time they finish their degree, sometimes already their second degree at Western, they already feel that this is their home. And so it's their first hometown in the US. So it means a lot in their lives. And so that's also a much more incentive for higher retention and more loyalty to the employers for the opportunities that they were given for them to stay here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Paulo. Questions? Anyone? Jump in.
I have a question. I don't know if you hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Svetlana Stone, and I'm immigration advisor at Western Michigan University. You mentioned that there's a question, and I want to learn more, because by saying if students will check that they need sponsorship, that's mean they disregard their F1 benefits, which do not require sponsorship, like CPT, OPT, STEM OPT, those programs do not require any sponsorship. And if they click that they needed sponsorship, basically they saying not true, that saying that they don't disregard what they have. You know what I mean? So how that works? I just, it kind of like tricky questions and maybe need more clarification.
Right, and I think that's why we're suggesting too that it would be, if that box exists on an application, we're encouraging our clients to consider putting a little box underneath it for explanation, right? So if you check yes, there's an opportunity to explain. If you check no, there's an opportunity to explain so that there's no misunderstanding. I think that's the best and easiest way to make that adjustment. So it just clears up any ambiguity in the response. And no one is, it's not suggested that someone is misleading or lying on an application in order to get to the next step, right? I think that's the best way to do it, because there are a lot of unique situations in that, but there's an unintended consequence when you put that on an application without room for a little more explanation. And candidly, I can say this to our clients, that is something that I had never considered before, but heard very clearly from the meeting that we held with students on April 8th. And I just want to make you aware of that because that could really help you. Thank you, Svetlana.
Yeah, because some of the students, they don't even understand that question.
Yeah. Yep.
They don't understand that they have those benefits and this is what they can offer to employer.
Right. So true. Yes. Thank you. Good. Anyone else? Question? There's a lot of silence. We must have covered things well, I'm assuming.
I can chime in along that line just for best practices for employers. I would encourage employers when a student applicant answers to the question, will you now or in the future need visa sponsorship for employment? Many of them do answer yes, because future can be 3 years down the road when they're anticipating their OPT ends. So it's important for employers to still consider those applicants if they want to have a broadened and diverse applicant pool. And again, if they simply follow up with, if so, when, that will give them a better time frame of, that when might be 3 years down the road, or even if a student's used a little bit of OPT, 2.5 years down the road. And again, many of our international students, when they're presented with those questions, they're concerned because they think if they answer it honestly, employers are going to automatically rule them out. So it's just important for employers to be aware of that. Also, another practice tip, occasionally we hear some employers ask the social security number on the application and make that a mandatory field. We would discourage against that. Oftentimes international students, they don't have a social security number yet. And so if that's a mandatory field that restricts their application from even being transmitted, that's going to create another unnecessary barrier. When students obtain their employment, there's a process they're able to then get their social security number from the Social Security Administration. And the Social Security Administration does provide guidance that for international employees, it's permissible to hire them first and then follow up with obtaining the Social Security number process, which tends to follow after the fact.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lee. Thanks for that. Well, we're coming up on the 11 o'clock hour. We promised we would keep you to an hour and no more. Before we part, I just want to make sure we don't have any last minute questions. Well, thank you all for attending. Again, thank you to our guests, Dr. Steve Butt, Dr. Paulo Zagalo-Melo, and Lee Ryder for joining us with great information about how we can make this connection between Western's extremely talented group of international students and the jobs that you're looking to fill here in West Michigan. And we appreciate your time. Again, reach out to me and let me know if this is something you want to jump into. We would love to help you. Thanks for attending today.
Thank you.
Sheri.
Thank you.